Hello, everyone. Hello, and good afternoon. Oop. I want to ensure that my sound is working well. I hope that folks can hear me. Good afternoon. Just going to give it a few moments to let people know that the broadcast has begun and that they can join in. Welcome. If you have not met me before, I am Stephanie Reed. I am the owner and founder of Aspire to Hire Personal and Professional Development Services. And I am here to talk to you today about self work, self care, and really meaning making. And I just wanted to introduce myself for those who may be new to myself, the organization, and our platforms. So, regarding our platforms and this event today, we are actually live broadcasting on 3 different platforms today. So, if you have joined me, thank you and welcome. But if you are able, I would love for you to share this out. I may actually do the same as we give people just a few moments to join us. But if you are willing, please share notification of this live streamed event on any 3 of the platforms where we are streaming. That would be LinkedIn, Facebook, and the YouTube. So if you're on social this morning or this afternoon, I should say, please share it out with your friends. So I just wanted to give you guys some indication of what we're going to be talking about today. Today's session is called Self Work, Self Care, and Meaning Making. And today's session I created the session really, I think, out of need. As a person who's been working in the DEI space for a number of years, I often used to host these sessions on the campuses where I worked and with organizations who would seek them out. And this session is really designed to create space for us to talk about how we as leaders need to show up as our full selves, having taken care and time to preserve and pour into our own self care, but that also we need to take time and care to do what I call self work. And I'll talk more specifically about what self work is and how self work and self care differ in just a few more moments. So that is what we're going to be talking about today, just to give you a little bit of information. For anyone who is new to us and the platform, you can find us on any of our social media platforms, including the 3 we're on today for this event. But I would encourage you to also follow us on Instagram. I spend quite a bit of time sharing content, talking about the brand and sharing tips, resources, and information about DEI and about what it means to aspire to hire on our Instagram page. You can also find out a great deal about the organization and also about myself on our website. Our website is aspire2hire.com. So, of course, you can definitely find out more about Aspire to Hire on that webpage. You can find out about the Aspire to Hire brand. And also, the framework for all of the work that we do is built around a set of characteristics that I coined the elements of success, or the elements A2H. You can read all about the elements A2H on the website aspire2hire.com. So please don't hesitate to check that out and learn more about who we are there. And so, with that, I just wanted to introduce myself. And let me maybe say a few more words about who I am and what brings me to this place to do this work. As I mentioned, I've been in the DEI space for quite a bit, but I have also been a DEI practitioner for a number of years. So my career started in higher education, and it's the crux of my career is in higher education as an administrator. I began as an administrator in career services, so I definitely have a heart for doing career development work, but I also care very deeply about equity, access, justice, racial inequities, racial justice, and all of those things that sort of make up what is now known as DEI work. So I've been doing that work in the higher ed space for a good 15 to 18 years, both in the career realm and in higher education, specifically leading diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives for universities for about 10 of those years. So I just wanted to give everyone an idea of the sorry about that. We are going to be talking about self work and self care. So I wanted to make sure I also mentioned that this session is not a professional development session in the true sense. This session is more a personal development session. It's a space in which I would like for us to engage in dialogue around our self care. So I say that to say this is not your traditional type of professional development workshop. I won't be workshopping. I won't be teaching. I won't be training in this time that we're together today in this session. Today's session is definitely one where we will be focusing on our personal development. What are our needs personally as leaders? And in some ways, it is capacity building. It's building our own personal capacity to show up as the leaders that we want to be. But just to be clear, myself and the guests that I will have on with us in a few, we will not be teaching or training or providing hard and fast rules for use in DEI work or in counseling or in any type of work. These things that we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be sharing best practices, things that have worked for us, things that we might have suggested and shared as resources and tips, very practical ways that people can take care of themselves, engage in self-work so that they can show up as the leaders that they want to be in any space that you work in. I also wanted to share with everyone that our session today is for all types of people, right? This session was not designed just for DEI practitioners. I designed this session with all types of leaders in mind. And that would be educators, school administrators like principals and deans, religious leaders, counselors. I think our counselors in these days and times are extraordinarily burdened with providing answers and safe spaces for people to process. This session is also sort of in response to what I consider to be trying, turbulent, or challenging times. And if any of you saw the session description, we were speaking very specifically about the news cycles and some of the cases, legal cases that are in the news constantly right now. All of the barrage of stories and narratives that come with those legal cases and all of the news stories present, I think, definitely unique opportunities for us to talk about how do we process our own thoughts and feelings about these things in order for us to lead our teams, our people, our colleagues, our students, our congregants through these times themselves. So essentially, this is a space for all types of leaders to be able to sit with us today and talk about what do these things look like, and how do these barrage of messages, my conflicting feelings about being a leader, but also needing that personal space to process my own thoughts and feelings as it relates to justice issues, racial justice, racial inequities, injustice, if I'm specific and intentional about my language. These are the things that I think are weighing heavily on leaders such as deans, religious leaders, counselors, um, industry leaders who people look to for the answers and for resources to get through these challenging times. This is what this session is about today, and this is really who it is for. So I wanted to begin there. I want to take just a few moments to also give you some information about what the differences between self work and self care are. And forgive me as I figure out the best way to show you what it is we're going to be working on today. So this is our problem statement. I usually try to begin most sessions giving everybody context for why we are here. And, as per usual, we tend to, as leaders, as organizations, we know that the work that we put in or the things that we provide through our services and our products or whatever those things might be that we offer, we're generally trying to contribute to solving a problem. And so today's session is designed to address this problem. Many industry leaders, whether, as I've said, you're educators or activists, school administrators, clergy people, and many more, we often carry additional stress. And when you are responsible for the care and education of others, when teams look to you to provide answers and resources in times of stress and uncertainty, it requires additional care and self-work so that you can show up as the leader you want to be and to lead your people. So this is the problem that we are going to be working through today. And I just wanted to set the stage for you all in terms of what we're going to be covering. As I've mentioned, it takes a significant amount of commitment to stop and recognize that you need to engage in self-work or self-care. And so, first of all, I commend many of you for being here already, engaging in this session with me today. And so I'm going to pause here because I just wanted to make sure I can view anything that's happening in the comments and in the chat. So let me pause before I get into a couple of the tips that I want to share on my end. I will be sharing tips, strategies, stories around how to engage in self-work and what self-work looks like. And also, I'll talk a little bit about meaning making towards the end of our session. Those will be the things that I will share. We will also be joined by a guest by the name of Gloria Debnam, and she will be joining us shortly. And in the sort of second half of our session to provide self-care tips, very practical ways that we can engage in self-care. And Gloria is a nationally certified counselor and many other things, and I'll introduce her a little closer to the 2 o'clock hour. Before I get into the tips, I should say, please, as you know, this is a live streamed event. So I encourage you to enter any comments that you have as you're listening in the chat. I also encourage you to enter questions, any specific questions or concerns you may have in the chat as well. And I'm seeing a couple of folks saying good afternoon. Thank you for joining. I also want to encourage you, excuse me, that I'm not going to be extraordinarily formal today. I'm here with my coffee. It is a Sunday early afternoon. So if you're still engaging in your jammies, I appreciate you and I thank you and I welcome you. Let's spend Sunday afternoon together for a little bit engaging in self-care. Coffee, sometimes for me, is a form of self-care. And so I'll be engaging in my coffee and conversation with you today. But please talk to me in the chat as well with any questions that you have or any things that you may want to ask us to address and talk through as we get through the session today. So the first thing I'd like to say and offer you is the differences between self-work and self-care. Self-work is something that I talk about often as a DEI practitioner. I think self-work is specifically working on knowing who you are. It's very introspective and reflective. It's really about spending time to understand what your triggers are, but also what your values are. It's important to show up at work, particularly as a leader, knowing exactly who you are and knowing what your triggers are. What are conflict points for you? Hot button topics. We all have them, and we have to know what they are in order to be able to manage them. In order for us to, and really managing them looks like this, right? You could be an educator and you could have a student, a colleague, or you could be, any type of leader at a staff meeting, and there may be something said in a classroom or staff meeting that could be considered a triggering statement or maybe even inflammatory. And while the statement might not be intended to be inflammatory or triggering, we cannot always control the impact of the words that we speak on others. So, for that reason, we have to be prepared as the people leading those conversations, the people who are there not in an authoritative way, but as the facilitator of knowledge, as the person guiding the work, as the leader. We must be prepared to recognize when we are going to be triggered or when we have been triggered, and then know how to work through it in the moment. A lot of the time these things happen very quickly in a work moment, and it does take some people a few more minutes to process. And so that's why the self work is so important. You're going to need to process what's happening in real time. So, my suggestion is that you engage in self work in advance. It's something that I practice regularly. It's the reason why I sort of stay connected to news stories in some ways, but manage my level of exposure to the news cycle and to social media news streams, especially. In order for me to manage my triggers, I need to be aware of what's happening in the world so that I'm not taken off guard or surprised at a news flash or a current event by someone else while I might be leading a meeting or teaching a course or anything along those lines. So we're going to have to take the time to understand what's going to trigger us. And so in that moment, you can then say, whether it's I practice counting to 3 before I respond. Another tool that I use for managing my triggers is asking questions. So instead of my response immediately being giving knowledge, I may be asking questions to seek to understand the other person's perspective. So asking questions is also a tool in self work. But the self work is really about reflecting on who you are and what is your trigger or many triggers, or what is going to be a conflict issue for you, and working through those things on your own so that when you show up, you can show up untethered by the stress of doing that processing. The more you process on your own, the better you are in front of others, showing up and advising other people. Another thing that I think is important are a couple of questions that I would suggest that everyone ponder. I'm going to offer 2 questions for self work. And I think I'm actually going to put that in the chat. There are 2 questions for self work that you should ask yourself all the time. And because this is a live session, it's not a workshop where I'm usually working off of slides. I don't have that information on screen for you, so I'm going to engage with you in the chat. So here's the two questions that you should engage in for self-work. The first is, who am I? And forgive me as I type and talk at the same time, but this is a very important question. The first question for self-work is, who am I? Right? It's going to be important in your own self-work journey because it doesn't happen just on Mondays or just on Fridays when you schedule downtime, right? Self-work should be ongoing. It's an ongoing practice. And the first thing that you want to be asking yourself is, who am I? Who am I, meaning, what are my values? What are the things that are most important to me? And what are my passions? Also, I think it's very important to align the work that you're doing with the things, passions, and causes that you care about. The second question is, what am I carrying? The second question, everybody, is, what am I carrying with me? I hope I typed that correctly. Let me double check. I did. This is a true test of my multitasking skills here because there is no production team here this morning. So I'm both hosting the conversation and pushing all the buttons for this thing to work. Second question that you need to ask in order to do self-work is, what am I carrying with me? And that really means what kind of things, values, lived experiences do I bring to the table? There are certain parts of my identities that I'm not able to take off and leave at the door. You know how people say, especially in workspaces, all that personal stuff, all of that news stuff, all of your personal problems, leave them at the door. Well, I take issue with that sometimes because a lot of our organizations today also are saying that they want their employees to show up as their full selves. And so that means that work issues that are happening, I mean, not work issues, but personal issues that are happening or things that are happening in the news are affecting me as a person. And I would like to show up at work as my full self and totally belong in that workspace. So it's important to also take time to understand and ask yourself, what am I carrying with me? Because what you are carrying with you impacts and informs your practice. It informs the ways that you engage with people, it informs and impacts and affects your communication, and so on and so forth. I hope those things make sense because those to me are very two key components to self work. Asking the questions, who am I and what am I carrying with me? So, those are the two questions to get you started in your self work. Another piece that I would like to offer you as a form of self work, there are basically three P's that I want to share. There are three P's of self care. And I'm not self care, excuse me, but self work. I'm offering these three P's specifically around leadership for people who have to um, facilitate and engage in difficult conversations or present information on sensitive topics. And again, that could be so many types of people. It does not only relate to DEI professionals. It does not only apply to teachers. It applies to marketers. It applies to religious leaders. This applies to lawyers. It applies to city planners, right? It applies to so many types of people who lead teams. There are always going to be times where we have to participate in difficult dialogues or difficult conversations. Difficult conversations could be about news issues that are happening and how they might be impacting the work that you're charged to do. But these conversations could also be about performance, right? Performance conversations as supervisors and team leaders are also not necessarily easy conversations. And as of late, which is again why I wanted to plan this session, because there are some very specific current events that are making work a bit more challenging for us. An additional place where difficult conversations are happening is around vaccination status um, and work. There's a lot of human resource conversations and management conversations about vaccination status and people's ability to stay employed or people's ability to find work. And those conversations can be very sensitive and at times can be difficult. So there are 3 P's that I wish to share with you when you need to engage in those difficult conversations. There are 3 P's to that self work to get you to be ready to show up as the leader you want to be, to have those conversations. Those 3 P's are preparing, practicing, and planning. It might sound overly simple, but it is very important to prepare, to practice, and to plan. So let me give you an example. And I'm also going to go ahead and share that in the chat. Prepare, practice, and plan. Preparing, practicing, and planning are very important in conducting self work, particularly when getting ready to have a difficult conversation or facilitate topics that are contemptuous or tricky. A lot of people, prickly, there's a lot of different words that people use when we're talking about sensitive topics. It is going to be of the utmost importance that you prepare so that you have all the knowledge that you need to be the person to provide resources and knowledge on that difficult topic. But also, when you're having a one on one difficult conversation, preparing is just as important. And it may sound trivial, but for me, I think it's a very practical tool and tip to prepare your talking points. And I'm not speaking about just presenting information or teaching or training, but even when you're going to have a one on one, a difficult conversation, I think it's a good practice to prepare your talking points. Prepare your mind for what you're going to be entering into. Prepare for the discussion, prepare for your training. That way, you have already set the tone in your mind about what you're going to be talking about, and you are fully informed in that conversation. I personally think it's very helpful to also practice prior to getting into this difficult conversation or facilitating a difficult discussion or training. So, preparation and practice. And practice could mean you just spend a few extra moments, maybe 60 minutes or so, you set aside to prepare your mind and actually practice talking through what you want to say. If you're someone who presents information often, you may want to practice so that you can make sure you've worked out all the kinks. You can then look at your slides, the information you're presenting, to see if you're presenting equitable perspectives. Also, to check to make sure that you're ready and able to use inclusive language, both in one on one, difficult conversations, and in times where you might be training or facilitating. So, practice also, people always say practice makes perfect. So, preparing and practicing. And lastly, of course, planning is it goes hand in hand with the preparation. Planning means that you set aside an adequate amount of time to give to the topic and or conversation. You don't want to invite people into a space to discuss something that could be highly sensitive or could be triggering, and you've only allotted, 10 minutes to it. And it may take a good 10 minutes to actually get into the conversation, or it may take the person or persons you're speaking with or engaging with 8 minutes to even process what they're experiencing. So it's important in your planning that you set aside adequate time for the session and for what you are trying to endeavor to do. I wanted to share a story with you to sort of give additional context to this. There was a time at one of the universities where I worked previously that I set out to plan a day long session, really. Um, it was a training session on the experiences of LGBTQ plus persons, but I was planning a session to build capacity in my colleagues to serve as resources and advocates for the lived experiences of LGBTQ plus people. Part of that session included an activity where we were um, talking about the coming out process, right? I was breaking down what coming out is and how it is a longitudinal process, sometimes a lifelong journey. And the activity, if you can imagine, requires a great amount of, it's a very sensitive topic, so it requires a great amount of care. I engaged in the topic. We engaged in the activity as a group. The activity went well. It led to some really productive, but also deeply meaningful conversations for the people in the session. Um, During the session, I had people share with me how much they appreciated my tone, my care, and the attention that I gave to that activity because they experienced that activity in a very positive way. These people, also, a few of these folks who shared this feedback with me, stayed after and shared with me that they went through this activity previously. They've gone through it a few times in different spaces, but they went through it previously at the same organization, and they had disastrous results. In the activity that I facilitated, it did actually become an emotional conversation, an emotional activity. There were tears. There was, a lot of thought and reflection on the coming out process from people who have the lived experience of an LGBTQ plus person and people who do not. Right? There was a lot of sharing, and there was a lot of emotion connected. And the folks that stayed after said that they were just appreciative of the way in which I paced the activity, right? I took the time and care and created a space in the moment to not just do the activity, but to sit with it and to talk through it and to breathe through it. And that was really helpful feedback for me, but to also hear the other experience that they had with another facilitator who did the exact same activity with not as great a result. The things that they shared with me was that that facilitator previously sort of was just reading a script, just reading the words, did the activity in about 10 minutes and really just ran through it, and just said, okay, this was great, thanks for doing this with me, and left people to sort of I guess, process the feeling of the activity on their own. So that's an example that I wanted to share with you about the importance of the self work that I call the 3 Ps, right? If I had not prepared and planned and practiced that particular activity before I engaged in it in a live training session with real people in real time, I could have had the same harm causing, anxiety inducing results. But instead, the folks who shared their feedback shared that it was completely the opposite. They were able to learn, reflect, and feel good about the coming out experience that they've had and sharing it with other people, but also just reflecting and sharing in the moment and not feeling that they were going to be harmed or further traumatized by the activity. So that is another way I wanted to pause and just share the story with you to give life to what it means to give time to preparing, practicing, and planning. I want to take a quick look at the comments just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Again, I encourage you all to, should you have any questions, thoughts about this, or reactions, to engage in the chat or the comments, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook or YouTube, I can see them as they come in on my page that I'm streaming from. I hope so far that these things are helpful to you. We are going to move into talking about self care in a few more moments. I also wanted to share two other tips before we jump into self work that I think are helpful for before we jump into self care. I'm going to share two additional tips for self work before we take that transition. There is one more practical thing that I think people don't realize is actually conducting self work. Another example of what self work can look like in different industries and different spaces is knowing how to ask good questions. And I consider that self work because it allows you to understand and practice advocating for yourself and advocating for others, right? So if you're working in a space, whether you're a religious leader, a teacher, an administrator, a dean, or if you're, a lead person working in, government work, where you have a specific audience that you're taking great care and intentionality around impacting or affecting, it's going to be helpful for you as the leader to be able to know when and how to ask the good questions. And really, what I mean by that is most of us here likely want to show up as strong leaders capable of having conversations that are sensitive, but also having conversations that lead to equitable outcomes. And that's the kind of questioning that I want to talk about for just a couple of minutes. Um, it's helpful for me to practice asking questions that lead to equitable outcomes. And it doesn't mean I'm going to ask the question in the moment and right away it's going to lead to my company, organization, or team having an equitable outcome, but it broadens the scope maybe of the conversation. It asks, it's a challenge really to the team, to the group, to take a few additional moments to allocate a few additional resources to take care around making sure that there are equitable outcomes. So what I mean by that is perhaps, if you're in a staff meeting, a planning meeting, curriculum development sessions, any of those types of things, you could ask questions of the lead if it's not you, or you could ask questions of the team that you are working with, such as what thought has been given to how this particular initiative is going to impact our customers, our students, our audience at every level, or what have we done to ensure that we know and can anticipate some of the impacts on all of our customers, all of the people in our market, so on and so forth. So there are different ways, obviously, that you might phrase that, but essentially you want to be asking a question that opens up the space in the room for not just you as the advocate, but for everyone else to also share in the advocacy and equity work with you. So you just sort of place a question on the table of how are we ensuring, what have we done to ensure that all of our customers, students, all the people that we serve will be impacted equitably and have equal access to access to our services. These are the types of things that you want to ask. And I offer them as self work because they allow you to sort of remove some of that stress from your shoulders and understand that you do not have to be the sole leader in ensuring equity. You can share that work with other people, and that's just one small way that you can do that. Looking at the chat once more, just checking in. My last tip for self work is this, and it's something that I practice on a very regular basis. I think it's very important in conducting and practicing self work to know and focus on your why. Know your why. So I'm going to type that in the chat. Know and focus on your why. What I mean by know your why and focus on the why as a tip for self work. I also find it to be helpful for my own self care as well. So, knowing your why, what I want to do is really share a tip with you, a quote with you that I read most recently that really amplified this for me. Knowing my why is actually one of the things that I teach and train on in Aspire to Hire and connect it to the elements A2H. One element A2H is self awareness. And I talk about our why when I talk about self awareness. But here is the quote that I wanted people to hear today and to connect it to your self work. When you know your why, you know the way. Did y'all hear that? Does it resonate with you the way it resonated with me? When you know your why, you know the way. I wonder what people feel when they hear that, or what does that mean to you? Here's what it means to me and how I use it to sort of center myself when I find myself struggling with additional anxiety or stress around turbulent times such as these today. For me, knowing my why, helping me to know my way, it really just means that I definitely understand where to focus my energy because I know what my why is. Your why leads and guides your work. When you know your why, you know your way, meaning you know where to focus energies because you understand from your position in the organization or from your values how you intend to contribute. So, because I know my why, I know in each space that I'm in the ways I'm going to contribute, right? Whether I come into a meeting, new work environment, or a new training session, not having done the work with this audience before, I usually center myself and focus on my why. And when I focus on my why, it definitely leads me and it helps to focus my mind on why I'm there and how I know I can contribute. It's also a way to really just remind yourself that you may be a subject matter expert in any particular thing. You may be trained in counseling. You may be trained in law practice, and you can really rely on those skills and that investment that you made in yourself in order to guide the work that you're going to do. I think people tend to have more anxiety around work, and get a little anxious and nervous and stressed in turbulent times during work because um, they sometimes think that it has to be this personal stance. Like if I have a personal position on race issues, or if I have a personal position on a legal case that is at the forefront of the news, I want to advocate for my cause and I want to be able to tell my perspective and my side of the story. I think everyone tends to feel that way. Everyone wants their voice to be heard. What I think and how I think this applies in terms of knowing your why and then knowing your way is that you can filter how to share your perspective, lived experiences, opinions, and so on, through the lens of your why, right? Why do you work for this organization? Why did they hire you? What expertise do you bring to the table? And you can and then use that filter or lens to contribute to the conversation, to contribute to the planning, and to contribute to the efforts that are being undertaken. So remember this quote: when you know your why, you know your way. I'm going to leave you with that. And what I wanted to do is just pause for a moment and prepare us for our next guest. And as I begin to do that, I want to make sure that you know who we're going to be joined by. I have a special guest joining us today by the name of Gloria Debman. And Gloria is going to be talking to us about the self care part of this whole session. Gloria is a colleague of mine, and as I mentioned before, Gloria is a national certified counselor. Gloria is a recent graduate of the Master of Education and College Counseling program at North Carolina State University. Gloria is a coach to a diverse pool of students at the Barton College and NC State University. Gloria and I are colleagues of a former university where we both worked, and Gloria served there as a career coach to undergraduate students. Currently, Gloria is serving as a training coordinator with Wake Tech in the Workforce in the Continuing Education Division. So we're going to be joined by Gloria in a few moments, and I wanted to let you all know who is going to be talking with us about self-care. And we're going to spend a few moments engaging in providing you with self-care tips in the last, I say, 30 to 40 minutes of our session today. I'm going to pause in the meantime to transition us and allow you to see a little bit more about what I wanted to cover in this session today. And when we return, we'll be joined by Gloria. All right, guys, I am back and I am joined by a special guest. Hi, Gloria. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can. I can hear you perfectly. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I am well. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Thank you for being here. And also, thank you for watching at the top of the hour and participating.
Indeed, indeed. I appreciate the invite and the opportunity to
Absolutely.
share.
Yes, thank you. Let me check. There's a quick comment before in the chat before we jump in. I just have a a friend who's applauding us in the chat. Those applause are probably to welcome you to the session. So thank you, Gloria, for being here.
Indeed.
I read through your credentials as you were joining to let the audience know who will be providing us with our self care tips this afternoon. But if you want to just start, if you would like to, by maybe sharing any thoughts or reactions to what you heard at the top of the session, or anything that you additionally would like to tell the folks about yourself.
Yeah, I for me, I actually before I went back to school to NC State in May of 2019, I'd worked for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation for almost 21 years. And
Okay.
as I guess, a point of self work and self care for myself, I decided that because I thought for years about leaving the government organization, you can get comfortable because the job is the pay and the benefits are
Hmm.
excellent.
Right.
And so you get the opportunity. And what helped me, I would say probably for the last 10 years I was there were always these periods I went through. I was like, am I doing the right thing?
Mm,
Is it just enough to just be getting this paycheck? And then I would get another opportunity. I have a temporary assignment, a different project. Like, oh, I'm good now. And then I go back to my regular job and it's like, this is not it. This is not fulfilling to me. And so
mm,
being a single person, I was able to make that decision because my life altering decision to leave my full time job and
hmm.
go back to school full time was not going to cause a
Uproot.
disruption to like a family or that was relying on my paycheck. And so it was a little easier for me to make that decision.
Okay.
Um, and so I just in you talking about self work and self care, I think they could definitely go hand in hand in terms of the preparation, the planning, asking those good questions because sometimes we're at work and we're
Hmm.
going along doing our task. And one thing I did appreciate about a prior supervisor that we would have weekly staff meetings, and she would ask us, "What's on your plate?" And
Hmm.
so I would have colleagues who were just like, "Oh, I'm good, I don't need any help." But I felt there was an opportunity for me to be honest. Like, I've got these two reports I need to get out, I've got
Right.
performance ratings to do, and now you're giving me this other project from the regional office. Help me
Yes.
prioritize these projects so I can meet your deadlines. And so that
Yes.
pushed it back on her to let me know, okay, definitely prioritize the regional office project, then performance ratings, and then those reports we have a little more time on. And so I
Okay.
think just taking that opportunity to be honest with people about what we're dealing with, because I've already proven myself. I'm a hard
Yes.
worker. I've got good performance ratings. So I'm not trying to avoid work. I just need
Right.
you to help me to plan my day, to plan my week. What's important to
Right.
you as my supervisor?
Right. I also see that as, and I just put it in the chat for people too. I hear what you're saying as a way, as another form of self care. It's advocating for yourself, right?
Indeed. Hmm.
Finding out what is, so here I learned this, or I took this from like my time as a salesperson when I used to sell cigarettes a long time ago.
What?
I did, yes, a very long time ago. But one of the things I took away from that as a value was keeping the main thing the main thing. That was something that they used to tell us as salespeople: keep the main thing the main thing. And for me, that meant know what is top priority.
Right.
So you pausing to ask your, direct report, you here's the two things I'm already working on, and you're giving me this third. Help me understand expectations and the way in which you want me to prioritize this work. That was you also advocating for yourself. So that's a form of self-care, I think, that people underestimate greatly.
Yeah, and it also helped me to realize that everything I had on my plate could not get 100%. And
Right.
so and I don't want to say just do enough to get it done, but there were just certain things, like if I have something that's going to the director of our division, that needs to be like full focus, full
Yes.
effort. If I have something that's going to like my local supervisor and she knows what's on my plate, I don't want to say cut some corners, but not spend as much time on that because it's just with us locally.
Locally,
So
right.
you also have to learn how to, and if there are opportunities to delegate. I was also
Yes.
responsible for, say, to answering questions from bankers who would call us and say, hey, Ms. Devin, we've got this new product we're going to issue. Can you look at this policy for me? So instead of Gloria spending her time going to the rules and regulations,
Right.
going back to review stuff, I'm like, hey, I've got the senior examiner and his expertise is in this thing. Hey, Steve Wallum, can you look at this for me? And
Mm.
provide me with the response I'll get. And I'm definitely giving him credit. I'm not taking credit for Steve's work, but there's
Right.
no need for me to spin my wheels spending 2 and 3 hours when I know I've got an expert in the field. And so actually being
Right.
okay with delegating responsibility to kind of save yourself that time and stress.
That's a great point. That's a very great point. Thank you for sharing those because I think these are sort of hidden um, tactics or
Mm-hmm.
tools that people can use that preserve energy, which is a form of self care. But it's also knowing that if you didn't take the time in your self work to recognize what are my resources, around me and how can I utilize them, these are these are sometimes secret things that are right beneath the surface that you can tap into. So thank you for sharing those. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and that also gave those examiners the opportunity to shine well in front of the bankers. They also got
Mhm.
credit for that during the performance rating. So it was a win-win. I got
Absolutely.
the banker the answer he needed, and this examiner got the opportunity to add something to his resume that's unique outside of
Right.
his typical workload.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, you have a wealth of experience in many different places, as I hear you talk about this
Mhm.
former role too. Today, I'm hoping that you are able to share with our viewers or folks who are listening or anyone who may watch this back, because this will live on YouTube for a bit. What are some forms of self care, particularly around mental wellness, that you would like to share with us today?
I think some of the biggest the way is just to even just recognize that we have to take care of ourselves. When I look through the list of individuals and the titles that they have that were planning to attend the event, like
Yeah.
the Vice President of Student Affairs, pre-med student, there was an assistant dean, senior director, professor, a multimedia storyteller, business
Mm,
owners, CEOs, directors, HR. And so all of these people fill into what this category about helping professionals. You are in
mm,
the position of providing care and growth and helping students, your clients, address the issues they have, whether it's physical, psychological, intellectual, emotional, or their spiritual well-being. And so
yeah.
being in a helping profession, people are coming to you with things that are concerning them and expecting you to help them kind of move through that. And so
Right.
just being in that position, and one of the things they emphasized to us, well, I think one of our first classes when I joined the Master of Education program was like, as a counselor, you need a counselor. Because you're
Mm,
taking on and you're absorbing what people bring to you,
right.
and you're trying to help them find resources, that stuff gets heavy. And so to help
Yes.
yourself manage it, you need to kind of be able to kind of, okay, go talk to a counselor, sit before
Yes.
someone and talk through how that might be impacting you.
That's a great piece of advice. Thank you for sharing that because one of the things I wanted to refer people to is use the employee assistance programs that your organizations provide. They're there specifically for that reason to take
Mhm.
self care, to practice self care. That's a great example.
Yeah, and one of the things I think, and hopefully now with all the attention that counseling and mental health is getting today in our world and at our jobs, that
Yes.
hopefully people no longer feel shame or weak for having to go and seek that help.
Right.
I will admit it took me a while to kind of be comfortable with that, but I will share my experience in using the EAP program. I think with FDIC, we got, say, maybe 6 free sessions. And then after a certain point, if I want to continue, I might have to pay a
Right.
copay. I also
Mm-hmm.
had the opportunity, if I just was not gelling with that counselor they assigned to me, okay, this is not working out. I can call back and say I need someone else. So instead of just
Oh,
giving up on
wow.
counseling and walking away, I could say,
Right.
hey, because of what they try to do is they try to interview you and get ideas to what would be most helpful, the type of counselor that you could
Right.
work well with. And if you just figure out like their personality, if they don't tend to understand, maybe they don't have the cultural competence to deal with an
Right.
African American female or an African American male. Maybe they don't have that experience. And so it's
Right.
no fault to their own, but just say, hey,
Yes.
call back that 1-800 number. We tried it a couple times. Can you assign me to someone else?
Now, when you did that, Gloria, was it a retroactive thing where if you begin with the new counselor, you
I
sort
think
of,
it resets. It
oh,
resets.
good. So those
As
free
far as I
sessions
do,
start over.
I believe so. And you could always also with at least the FDIC program, you got a new set of sessions based on the issue. So if my first
Oh,
issue was like stress at work, you get your
yes.
first 6 free sessions. My next issue, say, is family issues, another set of sessions. So it's
Gotcha.
not just like because I know that people are dealing with so much in this world that I don't think they're going to try to. And you have to look into your own plans,
Right.
guidelines, but hopefully it operates the same. Where I'm having an issue right now, the first quarter of the year, towards the end of the year, something else has come up, and I can go back
Yes.
and seek that advice.
Exactly. So I'm adding these into the chat so people can take them with them and that they live there. If people watch them back as well, employee assistance programs, utilize them, maximize the use as well. That's one thing. I had a boss back again when I was in sales, who used to tell me these sort of gems, and I didn't know at the time that they were gems, but she would pour into me by saying, "Don't just use the retirement plan. Maximize
Mhm.
that give, right? Don't just use the employee assistance program, maximize it." So to your point, like you said, if you want to deal with financial planning, that's one counselor, that's 6 free sessions there.
Mhm.
But if I want to talk about some familial issues or nutrition counseling, that's another program, another problem, and maybe another counselor, 6 more sessions. And that's a way to maximize the program, and an excellent way to invest in yourself and your self-care without having to maximize your budget at the same time.
Yeah, and even now, Stephanie, one thing I thought about, one of my concerns, and I'll admit this, when I first started going to see a counselor, I was living in Raleigh, and I was
Hmm.
like, wow, what if my church members see me going to this counselor's office? They're gonna think I'm on, what's up with Gloria? She teaching
Right,
Sunday
right.
school and she going to counseling. What's up with her? So I
Right.
intentionally picked a counselor in Durham. So
Mm,
it would limit, hopefully, the amount of people that would see me. And so,
right.
one thing, if that could be an issue for people, maybe kind of being concerned that someone sees me going to office. But fortunately, now a lot of the counseling can be done remotely from the security
Yes.
of your own home. You
Yes.
want to have a space where you can have good communication with the individual, where you're not distracted by family. You can also talk freely, but
Hmm.
being remote is also another way, so you don't have to drive to that appointment. So another way to hopefully push down those barriers that people might have with like, oh, I don't have time to go to the counselor, I've got to be
Right.
home after work. Now this
Yes.
is another opportunity maybe to do that.
Yes. Great, great points. There were a couple of things you said there that to me stood out because one, everybody, I think, not just, I think there's this narrative that only BIPOC folks worry about the stigma of counseling. I think everybody worries about the stigma of seeking help, whether it's from a counselor or a medical professional, whoever. So I think there's a stigma, and you just talked about how you mitigated, your ideas around that stigma, and I think their double-edged sword of the pandemic was that number one, the need for counseling increased, but so much so that counselors, physicians, everybody's now utilizing the web and the remote nature of work now to provide those services. And I myself, several years ago in Philadelphia, because Philly is my hometown, and when I lived in
Mm-hmm.
Philly, I did utilize my employee assistance program at one time to seek counseling. And I had that exact same thought process, Gloria, like, okay, I don't want to be pulling up in this parking lot where my auntie lives down the street,
Right.
or right, where I'm going to run into my high school friends when I'm coming out. I gave that thought as well. And luckily for me, I did land on a counselor who used their home as an office. So the
Okay.
basement of their home was the office, and it was a very discreet like parking lot. on the street of the home, but you weren't necessarily walking into a counseling office. It's like you were
Mhm.
visiting somebody's house. So I definitely appreciated that. And I appreciate you sharing that that comes in the process of decision making too.
Mhm. For sure.
Yes. Yeah. What are some other thoughts that you wanted to give us today about self-care and maybe tips for doing that?
Yeah, I think also kind of just being mindful of our personal expectation and personal goals. Sometimes we set goals like I'm working and just started working in higher ed. I just started Wake Tech in September. And
Hmm.
so I can put personal stress on myself by wanting to go above and beyond and
Mm,
taking on extra responsibilities. And I think just being what you mentioned of being kind of aware when you talked about what am I carrying? What am I bringing to the table? And
yes.
so, just I think being an older employee now, I feel more comfortable because I know I'm competent. I know I can do this job, but I
Right.
feel more comfortable in sharing some things that might be happening personally, being more honest with my time, and just
Hmm.
asking for clarity. I don't want to go around spinning my wheels, and so I'm a little more direct, like, okay, hey, I need guidance on this project. You asked me to
Right.
go work with um, Kim, and Kim
Hmm.
gave me different guidance from what you told me. So help me understand, what is the end result? What do you need from me? Instead of
Right.
me sitting back and being concerned, like she's going to be mad because I'm asking questions, like you got this
Hmm.
master's degree, you're supposed to be able to hit the ground running. But no, but you
Right.
got to give me some clear expectations. And
Yes.
so I think just being mindful also of how you feel. If you go, you're going along on your job, and then say something happens with one of your children,
Mm,
something you weren't expecting.
right.
Again, you can try to do it all and not take the opportunity to take personally that you might need, because you know, like I'm the VP and they expect me to be here,
Hmm.
and I represent my race and I represent, my department. But it's
Right.
okay if you delegate the responsibility for that short period of time, because you already proven yourself. They know
Right.
that you can do the job and you're not shirking work. Just like, my family's important. I need to take some time away, and I'll be back
Yes.
full force in a couple of weeks. Just work with me.
Mm. I love that too, because it's doing two things: asking the good questions, because again, you used an example of asking for clarification between two different sets of directives. But I have found, Gloria, that people appreciate you being authentic.
Mhm.
And I think it's pretty inauthentic to sit in a workspace where you're not performing because you have these other things that are now priority in your mind, right? I find that people appreciate authenticity, and they appreciate the honesty of you saying, here's how I would like to take some time and space to take care of what's at the forefront of my mind today. And I'm still going to deliver these outcomes by in this way, boom, 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 right? At least I have found in my work experiences that people respect that. They appreciate the authenticity and the vulnerability to say, because vulnerability is a strength also that I think people don't recognize. It does take strength to say to, especially someone you report to, I need a little bit more time and space, or I need to attend to something that's not work related so that I can be my best at work.
Yeah,
So
because
I appreciate you saying that, because I think those things are honorable and people appreciate them at work.
yeah, I was going to say is that you can also experience burnout, and so I may try to be so proud with my personal life that I'm like, I'm still going to show up as a VP of student affairs, and I'm just going to run myself ragged because I've got this
Mm,
reputation of being a superstar. And then that means that sometimes I go on autopilot and I'm frustrated.
mm,
And so I'm checking the boxes, I'm meeting with the students, but I'm not dealing with them sincerely. They're not getting the full glory that they're used to. I've met all my appointments, but then it gets to
yes.
be frustrating. And sometimes you develop this sense of like you don't enjoy the job, and then if you're on top of that, you're not being acknowledged or appreciated, you like super upset because you're
Right.
trying to maintain for appearances, and then your heart's not right, and
Mm,
your health might be suffering. Also, your mental health, which is very important. One of the things, a quote we kind of joked about throughout class or my time at grad school was like, you can't pour from an empty cup. At some point,
yes.
to kind of pull
Yes.
back and refuel. And that's going
Yes.
to look different for everybody. Everybody has different circumstances, but you got to recognize when you know I'm about tapped out. My supervisor at Peace be like, I'm crispy. I'm burnt out. She's like, I'm crispy. I my level of crispiness for the week. Y'all will see me later. And she would cancel events and appointments. She's like, I've got to pull back because I'm
Yes.
not my full self. And for me to try to meet with the student right now, they would feel my lack of
Wow.
engagement. And so it's like, okay, I've got to reschedule that appointment with these students, but I'm gonna come back ready because I'm gonna go take some time off.
Yes. Okay. I like that crispiness. Like I'm at my level of crispy that I could take.
Yeah,
I need to pull back and then pour into myself because I can't pour from an empty cup. Those
right.
are fantastic. Those are fantastic tips. Um, what I also hear you saying there too, Gloria, the way you described, you may have this day full of, a calendar full of appointments, events, activities, but particularly as a counselor, as a student advocate, and for folks who are on who might be, religious leaders or I don't know, team leads, and you just constantly have to give to other people.
Mhm.
Being authentic and taking a step back also prevents double work in some ways because you may be so set on autopilot and just going through the motions of a meeting, you may not pick up on things
Right.
that you needed to facilitate or talk through or process with those folks that you've met with. And so if you take the time and space in between appointments, because I think a lot of people
Mhm.
practice just like appointments back to back to back to back. I've seen even people that lead me block off time on their calendars for nothing. Like, no,
Right.
I don't have anything going on. However, I just need to breathe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I
And
think it's very important and a great way to manage your self care.
it's like you were saying, Stephanie, if I'm not my fully present, engaged with that student, one of the things that we as counselors kind of pledge to do is to not do harm. And so
Yes.
my not being fully engaged, I might miss some
Mm.
red flags that that student is pushing off. But if I have
Hmm.
this fully capable coworker who can meet with them, if it's something pressing where the student needs to be seen today, then I'm not just going to blow them off to the end of the week, but I'm going to
Right.
work hard to try to have them meet with somebody in the immediate future. And
Mm.
so also being resourceful helps you with self-care because I know what other resources are available across campus, whether that's the chaplain, another counselor, someone in HR, someone in student services. I'm fully aware what other resources are available to the students. Because sometimes you have students that feel comfortable walking into your space or employees that walk into your space and they're so
Hmm.
used to you being that listening ear and you're thinking like, oh my gosh, like I've got to prepare for this meeting.
Right.
And have to be okay with kind of letting it kind of quickly assessing, is this an emergency or is this their everyday conversation? Can I just be
Right.
honest and say, hey, I've got this really important meeting I'm not fully prepared for. Can we pick
Yes.
it up after that meeting?
Yes, absolutely. I from us working together that I've definitely had those days where there would be appointments on my calendar or people sort of show up in my
Mhm.
office space without appointments who still have a need, right? And when you are distracted by your calendar, your to-do list, you don't always pick up on the body language or what's unsaid. But it was always helpful, and I felt that I worked in a safe enough space that I could say to my colleagues who just popped in or a student who was there to just talk through their day, listen, I hear, some of the things you're dealing with. Do you think we can make an appointment for you to come back
Mhm.
tomorrow? Right. And it's not off-putting because you're definitely saying, I want to sit with this and really be present with you. And at the moment, I got to be somewhere else in 7 minutes. Right. So I would prefer to spend a good hour with you to really process what you're dealing with. People tend to appreciate that. And I know as we work together, you've seen my office door be closed more
Right.
often than it's open. We're just constantly dealing with the flow of meeting people's needs. So that's very real for sure.
The one thing I do now that my new supervisor, who's new to me, is not used to is I have just like these little handmade post-it note signs that I put on my door when I close it, like in a meeting or training or at
Hmm.
lunch or what's the third one? There's something like, or there's another one. I just had to let people know like before you just come bombarding into my office,
Right.
please be aware that I'm in training or I'm on
Yes.
a call or in a meeting. or I'm at lunch. And so please consider that before you turn that knob. Now, of course, as
Oh,
my
good.
supervisor, she has the authority, to come in. But for the most part, she respects me having that note on the door, and people kind of pause, um,
Right.
before they kind of come in. So kind of helping having that self-care. So if you feel like you're not comfortable, say, always leaving your desk or your office to take lunch, maybe just putting that sign on the door will give people pause to
Yep.
not just barge in, and just kind of give you that moment to just eat your lunch, and
Or not.
right.
Right.
It might be safer just to kind of leave your office, maybe just take a quick little walk.
Yes, absolutely. I hear a lot of people that I work with who, and this is in my new position, which is not in higher ed. I hear the same as what I used to hear in higher ed. In higher ed, a lot of us work on really gorgeous campuses, and we have the physical space to go somewhere and sit. Now, the double-edged sword of a beautiful campus and being outdoors is that you become visible to the people you serve, and they're like, "Oh, do you have a minute? Because I want to talk to you about that meeting that we have next week." Well, why don't we talk about it next week? Right? That's the risk that you take when you take a walk in the workspace or on the work campus. But I've also heard colleagues at my new space say the same things. Like sometimes I don't even have a destination for lunch. I just go outside and just walk to clear my mind. So it's absolutely important. And I think a lot of people practice that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, yes, absolutely. I have seen people who just sit in their cars to have that personal space.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you two more questions before we wrap up that can maybe facilitate a little bit more from you around self care, especially because you are a counselor and you have been for some time counseling, advocating with and for students. What are some things that you generally share or that you frequently share with students when you're trying to give them tips for being successful, but doing it in being mindful of their self care?
I think also kind of just being aware also that sometimes we may not put together is how we eat. The food
Mm,
we take in can kind of impact. I think again with me being older, just hitting 50 in June, I'm a little more mindful of how food makes me feel. Like just maybe for me, when I get stressed out or feel overwhelmed, junk food is like my comfort.
right.
Um, and then also I find myself, if I haven't planned properly, at the vending machine, getting stuff that I don't need. But as you
Hmm.
read over articles, it talks about how those high carb, high sugar, those processed foods impact you, not only your weight, but also your mental health. You're not as sharp and you're not
Yes.
able to engage. That kind of can impact your mental health as well. So having
Hmm.
to be mindful, what they call like mindful eating. So I just
Mm,
listened to a presentation from a nutritionist who says it's not always about restricting foods and but just think about how that extra piece of pie makes you feel. Like, but in that moment,
mm,
it might be tasting good, but after a while, you're like, oh my gosh, why'd I eat that?
right.
So just properly planning your meals, having snacks with you, just
Hmm.
encouraging students, like if you're always to just go to the drive-through window. My one of my primary caregivers, he was like, if you had to reach into a bag, reach to a drive-through window, don't eat it. He's
Right.
like, try to focus on, the natural foods, things that are going to help you
Yes.
feel good. So again, prioritizing your health and not relying on food to be that comfort and that enjoyment if you have such a busy, hectic day. To really kind of think about that. Also, want to make sure that you get adequate rest. I
Mm,
think it's been
yes.
talked about, kind of shutting down like the electronics, the TV, a couple
Yes.
minutes or hour, at least an hour before you go to bed so that you can truly get the rest that you need.
Yes.
I am getting ready to actually tomorrow pick up a sleeping test machine just to kind of make sure, because sometimes I feel like I'm asleep, but maybe
Yes.
I'm not really asleep because sometimes I wake up a little groggy, like I've been. So again, just again trying to be okay with talking to doctors about things that aren't okay with you, and really asking those questions. And is there something I can do to make my sleep more restful? The
Mm,
other thing I would talk about is setting boundaries. My friend
good
Sheila
stuff.
likes to say, no is a complete sentence.
Yes.
Because I'm single, a lot of people, like my family, will think. Like my sister, who's got twins, was just calling me like, because she goes, Aunt Gloria ain't doing that, and she can watch them kids. But
Mm-mm.
I have boundaries. Like I'm not watching your kids for no 8 hours. I've set max, and I love them.
Yes.
No, and I know she needs a break, so I'm being mindful of her, but I'm also
Yes.
taking care of me. Sunday evenings are my time to kind of before I go to work on Monday. And
Yes.
so also, I think also limiting your time with negative people. I had a friend at work
Mm.
who never had a good day. Like
Wow.
all day, every day, it was always raining in her world. And so and also there are people who just, if you're a really good listener, you could be like somebody's dumping ground. And so
Mm.
sometimes when I see
True.
the phone ring for a certain person, I'm like, I can't deal with that right now. So I hit ignore.
Yes.
And I designate time to call that person back because I don't
Right.
have energy right now for this 1.5 hour conversation. I'm tapped out.
Honesty.
So just being honest, I do try to call
Mm-hmm.
the person back. Now, if they call me several times in a row, that I might pick up like, hey, what's going on? Is there an emergency? Um,
Exactly.
so I try to be mindful of that. But just also one thing I thought about is sometimes one person told me that there's always a place where people gather for Thanksgiving. And say if that was your house, Stephanie, but then
Mm-hmm.
over this coming year, something changed. Maybe you become the caregiver for your mom or your dad or parent or your
Yes.
husband's children, parents. And you're like, you know
Right.
what needs to change my family dynamic. For me to keep doing Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's not going to work. And you're not
Mm.
being ugly to your family. You're just like, hey, my world has changed. And I'm
Right.
fully supportive of the family getting together. Look, I'll buy the ham. I'll sponsor the
Yeah.
ham. But we can have
Yes.
it at somebody else's house for my mental health.
Absolutely.
So being okay
Absolutely.
with setting those boundaries and not feeling like you have to apologize. And I
Yes.
could be, it could be, yes, in the past, Stephanie has allowed us to come to her house, but things have changed for Stephanie. And I think people respect you versus them coming over and you giving them the mean mug and like, okay, it's time for y'all to go.
Yes. Gloria, I'm laughing because I actually have a relative who hosted, but just really mentally wasn't prepared. And so the guests were like, we picking up this vibe that you want us to leave? And
Right?
she was like, well, the food is gone. I did pack up the kitchen.
Y'all
And
need the
so,
light.
yeah. I don't think she turned the lights out, but she was definitely, she came back downstairs in a robe. It was just like,
That was it. Y'all gonna get in the queues.
yes, they got all the cues. But to your point, she could have said, listen, why don't we, jump on Zoom and eat together from our own spaces? Because these are new ways that I think we celebrate old traditions of these holiday feasts as families. Why don't we do that? Or why don't we meet at cousin so and so's who may be just another mile away from here? And that way she could have exited when it was time for her to sort of refocus on what changed in her life that where she needed space. I think that's a wonderful and very realistic example, which is why I had you on today, because Gloria and I talked about today was not about providing these hard and fast rules of this is how you must function, or these are the suggestions from a counselor, because we also have to be very careful when we have these sort of public spaces, and we have counselors come on as SMEs, that we're not, this is not a prescription for anyone,
Right.
right? About this is going to work for you. These were very practical ideas, very practical strategies, or just practicing honest communication, practical ways to tell people that I am setting boundaries. I am prioritizing my personal, physical, and mental needs so that I can show up as the best person for you tomorrow or next week or
Mhm.
whatever the case may be. So those were wonderful. I truly enjoyed them. We have a person in the comments who's laughing, I think, along with us at some of our family anecdotes. Family time is it's a way for you to pour into yourself, but you also have to be mindful when you're pouring out with your family too. I think to your point, when you notice whether it's family or a colleague who's calling you and you know what energy they're bringing with that phone call, what you're really doing is refueling your especially when you circle back. You made it a point to say, I will circle back and call that person back. But when
Mhm.
you do that, Gloria, I'm pretty sure you have taken whatever time you needed to be fully present when you make that phone call.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
I know for
One
me,
thing
it's
I
none.
did want to mention, I'm sorry, Steph. One thing I did want to mention is that I know sometimes at work, if we go back to the work situation, and for me, someone again who's new to hire in, there might be a temptation for me to kind of prove myself. And
Mm-hmm.
so maybe trying to volunteer for any and all committees, any and all special projects.
Right.
I think you can choose to be strategic in that. And so if somebody says, "Oh, Gloria, you're a good note taker. Why don't you be the secretary?"
Not today.
No, I'm okay. I'm okay. Because some people will pigeonhole you into like being very detail oriented, very organized, and it can be a compliment, but it can be to your detriment if everybody's pulling on you to do that same thing on all these committees, and you
Yes.
see the end result necessarily helping you in your goals for where you want your career to go. So be selective in those extracurricular or other duties as assignments you take on. And again,
Yes.
it's your and so I think just starting out and being consistent in how you respond to that, you just talk to your supervisor. Okay, so you want me to do this project. How do you see this being on a committee long term helping me career wise? We're like, no, I just need you to help me. Our department has to take this on. We just need you to fill in temporarily. So just be clear about the expectations and what your long term career goals, and just realizing you don't have to represent the whole department. It's
Right.
okay for you to kind of pull back as you need to take care of yourself. It's important because you sometimes we see these memes on social media like as soon as you gone, your job is posted. When I
Yes.
when
Right.
when I told FDIC, they didn't wait till I left. When I told them I was going back to school, I think like a month out, they're like, "Hey, can we get your official resignation? Because we can't post
Wow.
your job until we
I
have your
too.
resignation." I'm like,
I'm not
"Dang!"
even going yet. Right.
But that's just the way
Right.
the world works. So don't feel like you're indispensable, and don't
Yes.
lose yourself, and your family suffer back at home because you're bringing home a big paycheck, but they don't have you. You're not
Mm.
present the same way for your family. Just to kind of be mindful, to try to balance it all, to be honest
Mm-hmm.
about how you're feeling, and that things have changed in your life. So
Absolutely.
take
Yes.
care of
Absolutely.
yourself, please.
I also love that very realistic example of when you're on these committees or you get assigned to these task forces, working groups, employee resource groups, even. As for the folks who are listening, watching, who are here, who are charged with creating them, I think it's important to hear what Gloria said as well as the person who does the delegating. I used to practice quite often as the person who was charged to create DEI committees or employee resource groups. I would say to the group as we began to form, I am going to rotate the duty of taking notes and sharing out agendas and preparing them because I want every person who's sitting at this table to be able to engage in the meeting when we meet. If you are the only person that takes minutes in every meeting, you're not really there to engage and participate. You're literally just writing, typing, making a record of what occurred.
Mhm.
But where is your voice in the space if you're always taking notes? So that was why I used to tell people, if you're going to be on this committee, you should know we rotate all duties. Somebody's going to be the person to bring in activity. Somebody else is going to be the note taker. Somebody else is going to prepare the agenda, different every single month or every time we meet, whatever the frequency is. So that's another really realistic example. I'm so appreciative of you, Gloria, for what you have shared today. Before I let you go, I would like to ask you one question to sort of, I think, summarize and maybe wrap up. But really, what I hope to do with this question, Gloria, is more so hear about you and not just what do you want to sort of, as the expert, um, suggest for other people. I'm curious, what do you think about around knowing your why as a counselor? Like, so, and also sort of harkening back to um, knowing who you are and what you bring to work. What ways do you feel like, or how does that resonate with you, Gloria? Knowing your why and sort of knowing what you bring to the work. What does that mean to you? And is there anything around those things that you feel comfortable sharing with us as we wrap up?
So I after finishing the degree in May, I
Hmm.
was a little disenchanted with the job application process and how long it took.
Yeah.
So after I had the opportunity to interview for 3 positions and I got offered 2.
Mm-hmm.
And just thinking long term about what potentially the impact on my salary would be, I took the higher paying job.
Okay.
3 months in, I'm now reassessing and like, wait a minute, you went to school because you have a heart and a passion to help young people. Unfortunately, the job I have now is administrative. I'm dealing with companies, and I don't have any direct contact with the college students at Wake Tech.
Gotcha.
And so I'm having to reassess my own personal decision and to try to
Mm-hmm.
find ways how I can give back, which I really, really want to do. And I feel like I'm not my best self and I'm not sharing my talents and what I've been purposed to
Mm,
do
right.
for a sake of a paycheck. And so it's not that I can't do the job that I'm given, but it's just like at this point in my life, with maybe 10 to 12 years for retirement, what is it that I really want to do? I really want to give back. And so
Mm,
that may require me to reassess where I am. It may change people's expectations of me, but again, my self care is going to have
right.
to be assessing where I am and what this looks like for me in the future. And I just know now, position I have, I cannot do this to retirement. And so I've tried to supplement that by doing things with young people through the YMCA and doing that. So I'm trying to supplement it until I figure things out.
Yes.
I don't just want to give up just for the sake of a higher paycheck. And so,
Absolutely.
again, because of my personal circumstances, I have that ability, that flexibility. And I know
Mm-hmm.
everybody may not have that opportunity, but just encourage people to kind of reassess your situation or
Right.
practice self-care, whatever that looks like for you, to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. That helps me to also at least touch on the meaning making part of this session, um, which we won't necessarily dive deep into. But what we just talked about, you describing how you're assessing, is this the place I want to be till retirement?
Mhm.
Am I able in this position to pour into students in the ways that that reinvigorate me from time to time? That is a way of making meaning of the work that you're doing.
Mhm. For
So
sure.
when I talk about meaning making, that also sort of goes into when we're challenged with times such as these, where, especially for you, noticing how counseling has risen to a very high level of relevance right now. People are showing up to work, school, and the like with I think, a bit more stress than we have seen in the last 10 to 20 years. And the meaning making, I think, is important so that people can know when it's time to pull back,
Mhm.
and to understand what they're experiencing both at work and personally. And so that's what I mean by meaning making, asking yourself the appropriate questions like, is this going to work for me?
Mhm.
Can I serve in the way that I want to in this type of role or in this job or in this environment? But also, meaning making looks like when I experience something at work that challenges those notions of why I'm here, taking the time and space to figure out, well, why did that challenge me? Was it a trigger? Am I at a point where I'm looking to exit? So the questioning of what is happening is really where the meaning making takes place. And
Mhm.
I think in the future we'll spend more time in another session talking about meaning making around current events and for educators and counselors in more detail. But I wanted to sort of put a pin in that to say it's important to practice and participate in meaning making for yourself as
Mhm.
part of your self work and your self care. And that really informs, I think, a lot of our decision making.
For sure.
So also with that, Gloria, and thank you for that last response, because it sort of is a great segue for me to say to the people who are listening and to you, Gloria, if there are any ways that you would love to stay connected to Aspire to Hire, because a lot of our audience, naturally, because I'm a higher ed professional by trade, a lot of my audience is students. So if there is ever any additional ways that you want to tap in with me, whether it's doing something like this again, or coming to one of our support meetings. I have a support group with young professionals and people who are looking to sort of branch out on their own. We have really small monthly support group meetings, and we're always looking for new people to join. So I just encourage you to, and I'm encouraging Gloria, but I'm also speaking to the broader audience, stay connected to Aspire to Hire on our website. Also, follow us on social media, where we share a lot of these tips that Gloria and I have talked through today. But it's also a place where I talk about or promote, for lack of a better word, some of the services that we provide, not just young people, but seasoned professionals who are still making meaning every day in the work that we do.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. I think it's we just all need to help one another and provide these different forums and platforms to do that, hold each other accountable, and just be able to share honestly. I think just being 50 just makes me like, okay, I ain't got nothing. Like me being transparent on what I struggle with and work with a government agency and in a job where I was in a minority, if that will help somebody else, help you navigate your professional career, help you avoid some pitfalls, I'd be glad to help in any way I can.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today, Gloria. And I want to stop here and just say thank you to everyone who watched, who chatted, who joined, who listened. We wanted to just pause to take time to appreciate ourselves, to invest in our self-care by conducting self-work. Even participating in something like this is a form of self-work and self-care. So thank everyone for listening and watching. Please stay tuned for more sessions like this. And I encourage you all to continue to do what? Aspire to hire. Thank y'all so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. And thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Gloria. See you next time.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.